One pressing topic in today's debate is the U.S. economy. To talk to us about this and U.S. investments in the Philippines, we have in the studio American Chamber of Commerce Senior Advisor John Forbes. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you, Claire.
Now, President Duterte has a redefined independent foreign policy. Now, is this causing concern among Americans who want to do business in the Philippines?
Well, certainly an independent foreign policy or an interdependent foreign policy is not causing concern because most countries pursue that. I can't think of a single country in the world that is completely isolated and has a true independent foreign policy. So the Philippines has always had a policy in which the most number of friends is the best, the most number of countries that you can trade with, etc. And I think the president is following that, as we see in the reports coming from Beijing this week, as the reports we'll see coming from Tokyo next week. But the American Chamber is the oldest American chamber here in this country outside the United States. It's been here for more than a century, and American companies have invested for more than a century. They will continue to invest. The links, the economic links, the trade links between the two countries are very, very strong. As you know, a large percentage of Philippine exports go to the United States. The largest percentage of remittances coming into the Philippines, which as a total are $30 billion, come from the United States. And most of the BPO industry that employs more than 1 million Filipinos are American companies. And the electronic giants, the exporters of semiconductors, are American companies, and they're power companies here that are helping to build power plants to keep the electricity on. So those ties are very strong. Now, the environment that we're used to over the years, from every Philippine ambassador in the United States who goes around the United States encouraging more investment, every trade secretary, every president, has been a welcoming environment. So when we hear any comments that are more negative, there's concern. But the only ones we've seen are those coming from the president. We're not seeing those coming from other cabinet officials.
Like you said, President Duterte has issued some strong remarks on some U.S. officials, even President Barack Obama. What are the sentiments of expatriates and even Americans in general who live in the Philippines about these comments?
I think we're sad about them.
Now, is the Philippines is lagging behind foreign direct investments in ASEAN. Now, will President Duterte's warming up relations with China be a concern to U.S. investors?
I think it's a question of what economies have to offer to investors. The strength of the economy, the size of the middle class, the demand for products either to be imported or to be made locally, the cost of production, etc. FDI in the Philippines increased quite sharply by 2014 to $5 billion a year. It stayed at that level. It's still at that level this year. But that's half of what Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and only a third of what Indonesia is receiving. So I would think the goal of the Philippine economic managers is to get up to the levels that are being received by these other countries. And certainly there's a lot of money in China. There's outward investment in China. There's a lot of Chinese financing for infrastructure projects. The infrastructure needs of the Philippines are very, very high. So we're all in favor of more investors and more infrastructure in the country.
The president is in China, like we mentioned earlier. He says he wants to build stronger ties with Beijing. He even mentioned wanting to visit Russia in the near future. Now, will these visits and talks with China and Russia have an impact on economic ties between the Philippines and the United States?
No, there's no reason they should. We have those kinds of ties, the United States. Within Asia, there's 6 countries that have defense relationships with the United States. Those countries, including the Philippines, or maybe not the Philippines, maybe I'm thinking of Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand, have strong relations with China too. China is a major economic power, as is the United States. So a country in Asia would want to have strong economic, trade, investment ties with both the United States and China.
All right. Well, thank you, John. He'll be joining us again later with more on this. Now, let's go back to our guest, American Chamber of Commerce Senior Advisor John Forbes. Now, John, both candidates have very different proposals on creating jobs and economic growth in the U.S. Trump wants to cut business taxes. That includes taxes for the wealthy. He thinks that this will attract more investors and create more jobs, while Hillary disagrees, obviously. What do you think about Trump and Hillary's tax proposal?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about tax reform in Washington in recent years. You know, what you have to keep in mind, it has to go through the Congress. And who's going to control the Congress after the election? Now, it looks, based on polling, that the Senate will reverse from the Republicans to the Democrats, and that possibly the same would happen in the House. Now, it would be very difficult in that case, if President Trump were to win, for him to put his proposals through. I think what Mrs. Clinton has emphasized is building up the middle class by reducing the burden of college expenses, raising the minimum wage, and raising taxes on people that are quite wealthy. That was a big issue coming from Senator Sanders in the primary campaign. She's also emphasized spending a lot more on infrastructure, which a lot of economists believe should be done now when interest rates are particularly low. U.S. growth is slow, as you would expect in an advanced economy, but still doing better than Japan and better than Western Europe. And since the financial crisis started in 2007, when unemployment increased to 10%, in the last 8 years, under the 2 terms of President Obama, it's fallen to 5%. So a lot of Americans feel better at the present time, but still, there are many that feel displaced by globalization in the manufacturing sector, and also in the sector that is booming here in BPO, because if those jobs are lost in the U.S. and come here, but in a growing economy, those jobs could grow in both places, both countries.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today. That was John Forbes from the American Chamber of Commerce. And that is Global Newsroom this Thursday, 20th of October. I'm Claire Saldran. Join us back here tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Have a great day.